My name is Mike Dawson, and I'm 70 years old. I thought I'd seen my share of humiliation in this lifetime, until my daughter's wedding. That night, her fiancé decided to teach me a lesson in class. He shoved my face into a $6,000 cake and called me a beggar in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that I owned every brick of the ballroom. He stood in the very floor beneath his polished shoes. Before I tell you how I made him regret the day he was born, let me take you back to the moment I realized how far my daughter had drifted from the man who raised her. The night had a kind of cruel beauty to it. Chandeliers glittered like captured stars, and violins whispered over the soft murmur of wealth. The azure grand ballroom smelled of roses, champagne, and money. I stood near the back, in a dark gray suit I'd owned for 15 years. Pressed, clean, but still marking me as an outsider among the designer tuxedos. I didn't belong here, not anymore. My daughter, Chloe, was radiant, her smile painted carefully, her laughter light but rehearsed. I could see in her eyes a quiet apology she couldn't speak. She'd been trying for years to fit into a world I'd never cared for. A world her fiancé, Preston Vale, ruled like a spoiled prince. He was everything I wasn't. Young, rich by inheritance, sharp jawline, sharper tongue. I'd seen men like him all my life. They thought money made them untouchable. That respect could be bought with designer cufflinks and arrogance. When his eyes met mine, I saw contempt, not hidden, not subtle, just pure disdain. To him, I was the poor old man who didn't know when to stay quiet. The wedding planner floated around, ensuring every flower, every flute of champagne, every polished surface reflected perfection. I watched it all, silently proud that the building stood as beautifully as the day it opened, because the truth was simple. This ballroom, this entire complex, belonged to me. I had built it 30 years ago when my company, Dawson Developments, was at its peak. I'd put my heart into these walls, though no one in that glittering crowd had any idea, not even my daughter. When the master of ceremonies announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, the father of the bride," every pair of eyes turned toward me. The music softened. My pulse thundered in my ears. I rose from my seat, adjusted my tie, and stepped forward into the light. Each step felt heavy with history, of sacrifices, of nights spent building dreams from dust. I didn't have a grand speech, just love in my chest and tremor in my throat. I spoke about Chloe, about holding her the day she was born, about her mother's laugh, about the joy she brought to every broken corner of my life. I wished her love, peace, and a marriage filled with kindness. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud, but it was warm, honest. For a moment, I believed maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. But then, Preston picked up the microphone, and that moment of peace shattered like glass. Preston's smirk could have cut glass. He sauntered toward the microphone, his arm casually slung around Chloe's waist as if she were another one of his trophies. The room quieted, a mixture of curiosity and admiration buzzing like static in the air. "Well said, Pops," he began, his tone dripping with that brand of arrogance that only the privileged can perfect. A real tearjerker. "You almost made me cry." Laughter rippled through the younger crowd, his friends, all silk ties and trust funds. Chloe's smile faltered just slightly. She looked at him, then at me. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the silent plea, "Please, Preston, not now." But the boy had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He clapped his hands, the sound echoing through the hall. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, the real fun begins. The cake." The crowd cheered as servers rolled out the masterpiece. 7 tiers of perfection, white frosting and delicate sugar roses, glittering under the chandelier light like marble art. Preston picked up the silver cake knife, flashed a smile for the photographer, and guided Chloe's trembling hand toward the first slice. The camera flashes burst like lightning. Click, 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 freezing a moment that should have been beautiful. Then everything changed. As the first slice fell onto a porcelain plate, Preston turned, still holding it. His grin widened, but this time it wasn't charming. It was cruel. "You look like you could use a good meal, old man," he said, his voice loud enough for the front tables to hear. The laughter began softly, uncertain. A few nervous chuckles. Before I could even process it, before Chloe could stop him, his hand shot out. He grabbed the back of my head, his fingers digging into my hair. The world turned white. A cold, greasy explosion of frosting filled my nose and mouth as my face crashed into the cake. The structure caved in, collapsing in a sugary avalanche. I gasped for air, the taste of buttercream and shame coating my tongue. Laughter roared now, not the polite kind, but cruel, primal laughter. Phones came out, cameras clicked. The rich always love a spectacle, especially when they're not the ones bleeding dignity. I pulled back slowly, my face dripping with frosting and fragments of sugar roses. My heart pounded, but I didn't move, didn't speak. Silence began to fall. Not respect, just confusion. Then Preston leaned in close. His voice a whisper meant for me, but loud enough for half the room to hear. Try some dessert, beggar. That word, beggar, sliced deeper than any fist could. The laughter died. The air turned heavy, electric, waiting for me to react. Chloe stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For a second, all I could hear was the violinist stopping mid-song, the quiet, uncertain cough of someone in the back, and then a voice thundered through the hall. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The crowd turned. An older man stood from the VIP table, silver hair, tailored navy suit, and the kind of presence that demanded attention. Henry Harrison, a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom, whose signature could change skylines. He wasn't a man you ignored, especially not in my city. He glared at Preston, his face hard with fury. Then he pointed at me. "That beggar," he said, his voice booming, "is Mike Dawson, the man who built half this city with his bare hands. Including this very building you're standing in, you arrogant little fool." The entire room went still. Preston's jaw fell open. The color drained from his face until he looked like a man carved from marble. And in that silence, with frosting still dripping from my chin, I looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with something far more powerful, pity. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The sound of the chandeliers humming overhead filled the silence. Preston stood frozen, still clutching the silver cake knife as if it could somehow anchor him to his crumbling pride. Henry's voice had cut through that ballroom like a hammer through glass. Sharp, final, undeniable. I straightened slowly, wiping the frosting from my face with the white handkerchief I always carried. My reflection in the nearest mirror was absurd. An old man with cake in his hair, cream in his beard, but eyes cold, steady and awake. "Mr. Harrison," Preston stammered finally, forcing a hollow laugh. I didn't realize—" "No," Henry interrupted, his tone low, seething. "You didn't because men like you never look past your own reflection long enough to see the giants you're standing on." Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wildfire. Mike Dawson? He built this place? The Dawson Tower? The waterfront complex? Every seat that had laughed a minute ago was suddenly heavy with shame. Every phone that had recorded the moment was lowered in trembling hands. Chloe moved first. She stepped toward me, her eyes glassy, her lipstick trembling as she whispered, "Dad." "I didn't know—" I smiled faintly in a small, tired curve of forgiveness. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said softly. "You weren't supposed to." The photographer quietly lowered his camera. The DJ turned down the music. And for the first time that night, the glamour peeled away. The glitter, the wealth, the champagne sparkle, all of it looked cheap. I turned toward Preston, who still stood there, face pale and hands shaking. He tried to force a grin, his voice cracking. You could have said something earlier, you know." Saved me the embarrassment. I let out a low breath, calm as a winter wind. "Son," I said, "I built this city brick by brick, deal by deal. I've been embarrassed by bigger men than you and survived every single one. But you just learned what happens when a man thinks his money makes him untouchable." Henry nodded slowly, almost approvingly. "Mike, I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "We have a few projects that could use your kind of wisdom again." He turned to Preston with a look of disdain sharp enough to draw blood. "As for you, young man, I'll make sure your father hears about this. I've never liked working with men who mistake cruelty for confidence." Preston's composure shattered. His perfect posture deflated. He looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. Except this time, he'd stolen his own dignity. Chloe's tears began to fall then. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered again. I reached out, brushing her cheek gently. "You've got nothing to be sorry for, Chloe. Just don't lose yourself trying to live someone else's dream." Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of the ballroom. The crowd parted silently, like water around a stone. No one dared to speak, not even Preston. The door shut behind me with a soft click that sounded more final than thunder. Outside, the city lights blinked against the night sky. Towers I had built, Streets I had paved, lives I had unknowingly shaped. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing. I loosened my tie and inhaled deeply. The scent of the city I had built still carried the mix of steel, rain, and ambition. I walked down the marble steps of the Azure Grand, the very building that had witnessed my highest triumphs and my deepest humiliation. Funny how life has a way of bringing you back full circle, to the same walls, the same floors, only with a different kind of weight on your shoulders. I remembered the first brick I ever laid. I was 24, broke, and carrying a toolbox heavier than my wallet. My father had died young, leaving behind nothing but a lesson I never forgot. Son, if you want your name to mean something, build something that lasts longer than you. And I did. In less than 2 decades, Dawson Developments became a name, whispered in every real estate meeting from Chicago to Miami. We built skyscrapers, bridges, shopping centers, structures that defined skylines. I'd gone from sleeping in my pickup truck to sitting at tables where billion-dollar contracts were signed. Then came the crash, not the financial kind, the human kind. My wife Elaine got sick, cancer. I stopped caring about profits, about investors, about meetings. While the world wanted my signature, all I wanted was more time. I sold off projects to cover her treatments, ignored board meetings, missed deadlines. When she passed away, I didn't even recognize the man staring back at me in the mirror. The empire I built with my hands began to crumble without my focus. Partners turned vultures. Friends became ghosts. And before I realized it, the company I founded was stripped from me, piece by piece, until I was left with nothing but the deeds to a few old buildings no one wanted. One of those buildings was the Azure Grand, the same place where years later I'd stand with cake dripping from my face. I kept that ownership quiet. Pride wasn't my currency anymore. I'd learned that real strength wasn't in showing off what you had. It was in knowing what you could walk away from. Chloe never knew how bad things got. I didn't want her to. She was young when her mother died. I did my best to give her everything, a college education, a future. But the world she married into, it was built on a different kind of foundation, the kind that crumbles under real weight. When Preston came into her life, I tried to warn her. There was a look in his eyes I recognized, the look of a man who measured others by their bank balance. But she was in love, and love makes even the smartest people go blind. So I stayed quiet. Let her believe her old man was just a retired construction worker with a few stories and a stubborn streak. It was easier that way. As I walked down the street that night, the city lights reflected off the puddles like tiny constellations. Each one reminded me of something I'd built, a tower, a bridge, a memory. They could take my company. They could mock me in front of hundreds, but they could never take that. The legacy wasn't in the money. It was in the skyline itself. Around midnight, I sat at my old oak desk in the apartment I'd lived in since I stepped away from the business. Nothing grand, just a 2-bedroom place above a hardware store. But it was quiet, and it was mine. I opened a drawer and pulled out a file I hadn't touched in years. Property titles, Azure Grand Ballroom, still mine. 2 office complexes in the city center, mine. The Vale building, the very one owned by Preston's family. The same one where his company leased 2 floors, technically mine. Through a holding name I'd kept buried under layers of old paperwork. When you spend a lifetime in construction and real estate, you learn one golden rule. The man who owns the land controls the story. And Preston had built his story on my ground. By sunrise, my plan wasn't one of vengeance. It was of quiet balance. The kind of justice that doesn't require shouting, just signatures. The next morning, I drove into the city wearing the same suit from the night before. The frosting stain on the sleeve had dried. A quiet reminder of what pride looks like when it hardens. At 8 a.m., I walked into Harrison and Cole Properties, Henry's firm. His assistant nearly tripped over herself when she saw me. Mr. Dawson, Mr. Harrison said you could go right in. Henry was waiting with 2 coffees and that familiar sharp grin. You always did have impeccable timing, Mike, he said, sliding one toward me. You're the talk of the city this morning. Someone leaked footage of what happened last night. I sighed. Of course they did. He chuckled. Don't worry. You came out looking like a saint. Him, not so much. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. There it was, the video already going viral. The caption read, "Billionaire-to-be humiliates bride's father. Instant karma follows." Preston's name was trending. Sponsors were pulling out of his latest development deal. His father's firm, Vail Holdings, had released a statement calling his behavior unacceptable and deeply disappointing. Poetic, really. He wanted the world to laugh at me. Now it was laughing at him. "Mike," Henry said, leaning back, "I know you're not one for revenge, but you do realize the Azure's renewal contract with Vail Holdings is due next week?" I smiled. "I do." He nodded slowly, understanding. "So you're going to pull the lease?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to triple it," Henry grinned. "You haven't changed a bit." "I have," I said. "I just learned that sometimes the best way to remind a man what respect means is to make him pay for every square foot he stood on." We both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from shared history and scars. By noon, the papers were signed. By evening, Vail Holdings accounts were already in motion to transfer the inflated amount. Preston's humiliation now had a financial echo. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Maybe forgiveness was starting to rebuild too, one small brick at a time. The next morning, the sun came through my kitchen window in warm gold streaks, dust dancing in the light like quiet confetti. For the first time in years, I brewed 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. Old habit, maybe. Or maybe hope. At exactly 9, there was a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, Chloe stood there. No makeup, no designer dress, just a young woman with swollen eyes and a heart that looked too heavy for her chest. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, stepping aside. "Come on in." She looked around the apartment, her eyes catching on the framed photo of her mother on the wall, the same one that had followed me through every move, every rise and fall. Chloe touched the edge of the frame, her fingers trembling. "I've been so blind," she said finally, voice breaking. "I didn't see what he was. I didn't see what I was becoming." I pulled out a chair for her at the small table and sat across. The air was quiet but not cold, just the kind of silence that carries truth between two people who love each other too much to lie. It just makes you trust the wrong people sometimes, and that's okay. It means your heart still believes there's good out there. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. He won't stop calling me, begging me to make statements to the press, to tell everyone it was just a misunderstanding. "But Dad," her voice cracked, "I can't even look at him." "He embarrassed you." "He embarrassed us. And all for what, a joke?" I reached over and took her hand, and small, shaking, but still my little girl's hand. "You don't owe him a single word. Chloe, let him learn what real consequences feel like. Sometimes silence teaches louder than shouting." She nodded, eyes glistening. "They're saying his investors are pulling out. His father's company might lose their biggest deal because of the video." "Good," I said quietly. "He'll have plenty of time to think about the kind of man he wants to be." Chloe looked at me, brow furrowed. "And you? How are you so calm?" "He humiliated you, Dad. I smiled faintly, the kind that comes from years of learning what truly matters. "Because anger is heavy, sweetheart. And I spent too many years carrying weight that didn't build anything. I've learned when to set it down." She pressed her lips together, then stood and wrapped her arms around me. It was the kind of hug that heals something you didn't even know was broken. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "And I'm so sorry I ever let anyone make me feel ashamed of who you are." "You never have to apologize for finding your way," I said. "Even builders take wrong turns before they draw the right plan." We laughed softly through the tears, and in that small kitchen, with 2 cups of cold coffee between us, something mended, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and completely. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Henry Harrison. "Henry, thought you'd like to know. Preston Vail tendered his resignation this morning. Word is his father's cutting him off financially." I stared at the message for a long time, then put the phone down. Karma didn't need help when it already had blueprints drawn. Outside, construction noises filled the air. Drills, hammers, the heartbeat of the city. The sound comforted me. It reminded me of who I was, who I still am. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just Mike Dawson, the man who lost everything. I was Mike Dawson, the man who built it all again, this time stronger. 2 months later, the city was thawing out of winter. The snow piles had melted into thin silver puddles along the sidewalks, and the skyline glowed with that soft gold haze Detroit gets just before spring. I was back on a construction site, not as a laborer this time, but as a site supervisor. The company had seen the viral video, seen the way I handled it. and decided they needed a man like me, someone who could build with both hands and heart. Funny how life works. The same moment that tried to destroy you can end up rebuilding you higher than before. That morning, as I walked through the half-finished structure, clipboard in hand, the smell of fresh timber all around, I heard someone call my name. "Dad!" I turned, and there was Chloe, in a yellow hard hat and jeans, holding 2 cups of coffee from the corner cafe. She was smiling, not the forced smile she used to wear at Preston's side, but a real one, the kind her mother used to wear when sunlight hit her face just right. She handed me a cup and looked around. "So this is your new project?" "Yep," I said, pride warming my chest. "Affordable housing units for single parents. The city's sponsoring part of it." She nodded, eyes shining. "You're building homes for people starting over." I smiled softly. "I guess I am." Chloe took a deep breath. "I've been volunteering at the shelter too, the one Mom used to talk about. Helping with resumes, teaching kids how to use the computer lab. It feels good, Dad, real good." I stared at her for a long second. My throat tightened. "Your mom would be proud of you, Chloe." She smiled through tears. "You think so?" "I know so." For a moment the world felt still. Just the 2 of us, standing on the skeleton of something new, something solid, the kind of foundation we'd both been searching for. And then, as if fate needed one final poetic twist, a familiar car pulled up at the edge of the site, a black luxury sedan, clean but empty looking, like the man who stepped out of it. Preston Vale. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He looked smaller, deflated, a man stripped of all the polish his money used to buy. He hesitated before walking over. "Mike," he said quietly. "Chloe." Chloe's jaw tensed, but I put a hand on her shoulder. "What do you want, Preston?" I asked calmly. He glanced down, almost ashamed. "I just came to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I lost the company. My father wants nothing to do with me, and I don't blame him. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, about the kind of man I became." I studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance left. Just a man standing in the ruins of his own making. "I'm not the man you should be apologizing to," I said. He turned to Chloe, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Chloe, I hurt your father." "I hurt you." I thought success made me better, but it just made me hollow. Chloe looked at him, not with anger, but with something harder to give. Compassion. "You can start over," she said quietly, "but not by running back to who you were. By becoming someone you can live with." Preston nodded, eyes glistening, then turned and walked away. No words left. Just the sound of gravel crunching under his expensive shoes. When he disappeared down the street, Chloe exhaled deeply, as if a storm had finally passed. I put my arm around her shoulders. "Let's get back to work." She grinned. "Yeah, boss." As the day stretched on, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold over steel beams and scaffolding. Every clang of a hammer, every hum of machinery, felt like music, a song about second chances. When the shift ended, I climbed to the top floor, still open to the sky. From up there, Detroit looked endless, alive. I closed my eyes and whispered, half to myself, half to the heavens, "Janelle, we did it." "She's okay now. We're okay." A breeze swept through, cool and kind, like a reply only I could hear. And standing there in that half-built building, I realized something profound. You can lose everything. Your job, your pride, your place in the world. But as long as you have the courage to stay kind, you can rebuild, maybe even better than before. The camera would have faded out right there, father and daughter, standing in sunlight and sawdust, 2 people who'd been broken, rebuilt, and finally found home again.